There seems to be an unspoken rule in nature. Life in the water is supposed to be scarier than life on land. That's true today, with everything from great white sharks to creatures still barely studied in the deep ocean trenches. It's also true throughout most of prehistory. Even in the age of dinosaurs, the oceans hid nightmares. Apex marine reptiles with jaws powerful enough to bite a small dinosaur clean in half that would have made a T Rex look almost reasonable by comparison, but there was one window of time, a very long time before the dinosaurs, when that rule completely broke and broke badly. For a stretch of the Permian period, roughly 260 million years ago, your odds of survival were actually better in the water because on land, almost everything, including the climate itself, seemed designed for maximum lethality. Let's start with the geography because it explains almost everything else that follows. During this stretch of the Permian, nearly all of Earth's landmass had fused into a single supercontinent, Pangaea, stretching from pole to pole. No ocean splitting up predators into separate regions, keeping populations isolated and manageable. No isolated islands offering an easy escape route for anything trying to outrun something bigger than itself. Just one enormous, connected landmass where nothing that evolved to kill you ever had to stop at a coastline, and nothing that evolved to survive ever really got to relax. The interior of Pangaea was brutal even before a single predator showed up. Vast stretches were arid, baked by a climate with none of the moderating effect oceans normally provide inland. Extreme heat, extreme drought, and violent swings in temperature shaped nearly every creature that survived there into something built to endure and often built to kill. Compare that to the seas. Permian oceans had their share of danger: sharks, large predatory fish, ammonoids drifting through the water in enormous numbers, some armed with hooked jaws capable of shredding smaller prey. But nothing in the water came close to matching what was crawling around on land during this particular stretch. The ocean's predators were mostly ambush hunters working alone, patient rather than relentless. Land had entire ecosystems of apex predators competing directly with each other, in the open, in broad daylight, with nowhere at all to hide. So what actually made the water safer? Partly scale, partly variety. Marine predators of the period were dangerous but limited in how large and how specialized they could get compared to what was unfolding on land. Land offered endless niches for something to evolve into a nightmare. Burrowing predators, ambush predators, pursuit predators, even venomous predators. Water simply didn't have the same range of evolutionary experiments running all at once. Now, here's the opposite story: land and the creatures that ruled it. Before dinosaurs existed, Earth's dominant land animals were synapsids, the same broad lineage that eventually gave rise to mammals, including us. These weren't reptiles in the way we usually picture prehistoric predators. They were something stranger, something that often looked like a fever dream cross between a lizard and a wolf. Some of the earliest synapsid predators carried something Earth had never really seen before. Genuine saber teeth evolved tens of millions of years before anything resembling a cat existed. Long before saber-toothed cats ruled anywhere, animals like Dimetrodon, with its towering sail running down its spine like a warning sign, hunted using elongated canine teeth built for tearing into prey, twice removed from anything we'd call a mammal today. Dimetrodon wasn't a dinosaur at all, despite how often it gets mistaken for one in toy aisles and museum gift shops. It lived tens of millions of years before the first dinosaur ever existed. And for a long stretch of the early Permian, it was one of the largest, most successful land predators anywhere on the entire planet. But the true horror show came later, in the Permian's final chapters. In what's now South Africa, a group of massive dinocephalians, animals like Ankylosaurus, grew into some of the largest land predators the world had ever produced up to that point, with skulls built like battering rams, thick bony crests reinforcing every bite, and a jaw designed to crush prey outright rather than simply puncture it. For a while, one of these dinocephalians held a real, credible claim to being the single largest land predator alive anywhere on the planet, unmatched by anything else walking Pangaea at the time. Meanwhile, in what's now Russia, an entirely different family of nightmares was busy competing for the same title, unaware anything in Africa was even trying. The gorgonopsids of the Russian Permian, particularly a genus called Inostrancevia, grew to sizes rivaling a modern bear. It may have hosted some of the single deadliest land predators to have ever existed on Earth up to that point in history. Africa had its own answer to all of this. In the Karoo Basin of South Africa, giant gorgonopsids like Rubidgia ruled entire ecosystems, growing to sizes that dwarfed nearly every other predator sharing their territory, their skulls armed with the same saber-toothed design that seemed to keep independently evolving throughout this era, again and again, as if nature simply couldn't resist reaching for the exact same terrifying blueprint. Standing opposite the gorgonopsids was their arch nemesis of sorts, the therocephalians, smaller on average but faster, more numerous, and in some cases armed with a weapon nothing on Earth had ever really used before in quite this way. Fossil evidence from a therocephalian called Eucumberzia shows grooved teeth connected to what appears to be venom glands, tucked into a small depression in the skull, making it one of the very first animals in the entire history of life on Earth to hunt, using venom as a genuine primary weapon, long before snakes ever existed. Then there were the mid-sized nightmares filling every remaining gap left over. One predator, roughly the size of a modern jaguar, carried a skull disproportionately large for its body, closer to what you'd expect on something the size of a lion, built for delivering a single devastating bite rather than a prolonged, exhausting chase across open ground. Just behind the true giant sat a runner-up for largest land carnivore of the era, still large enough to challenge almost anything else walking the supercontinent, simply overshadowed by whichever gorgonopsid or dinocephalian happened to be even bigger during that particular millennium. And these were just the top of the food chain. Late Permian ecosystems were stacked with mid-tier carnivores, filling niche after niche the way modern Africa is stacked with big cats, hyenas, and wild dogs all competing over the same herds. Even the amphibians weren't safe to underestimate, water or not. Giant temnospondyls, some stretching many feet long, patrolled rivers, swamps, and shallow floodplains with crocodile-like heads and rows of interlocking teeth, blurring the line between safer in the water and still absolutely terrifying, depending on exactly which stretch of water you happen to be standing near on any given day. The herbivores, meanwhile, had to evolve serious bulk just to survive being constantly surrounded by all of this. Massive parasaurs, heavily armored and built like reptilian tanks with bony studs covering their hide, grazed across Pangaea in numbers large enough to feed the endless predator population stalking them from every direction. Some of the largest land animals on Earth at the time weren't predators at all, but slow-moving fortresses of muscle, bone, and armor, built to survive an environment where almost nothing around them wanted to leave them alone, even for a single afternoon. Even the skies weren't calm during all of this. Giant insects, including dragonfly relatives with wingspans stretching well over 2 feet from tip to tip, patrolled the Permian air freely, a holdover from an earlier era of unusually oxygen-rich atmosphere that had allowed insects to grow to sizes nothing alive today, in any modern rainforest, could realistically match. So if land was this dangerous, why did any of it stop? Because nature, it turns out, wasn't finished trying to kill everything. Around 252 million years ago, the Permian period ended in the most catastrophic extinction event Earth has ever recorded, nicknamed, appropriately, the Great Dying. Massive volcanic eruptions in what's now Siberia poured greenhouse gases into the atmosphere for thousands of years without stopping, acidifying oceans, collapsing entire food chains from the bottom up, and pushing global temperatures into territory almost nothing alive at the time had ever evolved to survive. By the time it finally ended, somewhere around 90% of all species on Earth, in the water and on land combined, were gone forever. The gorgonopsids, the dinocephalians, the giant amphibians, the armored herbivores, nearly all of it, wiped from the planet in what amounts to a geological blink of an eye. The very land that had spent millions of years perfecting new ways to kill everything living on it was, in the end, killed itself by something even bigger, slower, and far more indifferent than any saber-toothed predator it had ever managed to produce. For one brief chapter in Earth's 4.5 billion year history, the ocean was the safer place to be. Everything else, land, sky, and eventually the entire planet's climate, was simply too busy trying to end you